At her shower, my daughter said into the mic, "She's only here because she paid for the food." Her friends laughed. I smiled. Then I erased her from my will. She posted photos. I published my side. They planned a wedding. I triggered a legacy clause. She had the microphone. I had the contract. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. I paid for the catering. She paid me back in humiliation. The room was trimmed in pink hydrangeas and eucalyptus garland, arrangements Valerie had ordered herself after staying up late comparing Pinterest boards and vendor reviews. The light from the windows bathed the rented event hall in a soft gold, and the buffet, garnished charcuterie boards, tea sandwiches, sparkling lemonade, sparkled like something out of a lifestyle blog. It should have been perfect. Valerie sat near the back, just left of the mimosa bar, her posture upright but unassuming. She wore a pale blue wrap dress, pearls from her late mother, and the faintest smile that had started to feel less like happiness and more like polite armor. She watched her daughter, Lacey, move between guests like a celebrity on tour, laughing too loudly, hugging selectively. The white lace midi dress she wore made her look younger, though the 5-inch heels and aggressive contouring said otherwise. Parker, the fiancé, was nowhere in sight. It was, after all, her day. At the front of the room, someone tapped a spoon against a champagne glass. The chatter stilled. A mic was passed to Lacey, who took it with a flourish and a fake gasp of surprise. "Oh gosh, okay," she said, swaying slightly on her heels. "I wasn't planning to do a speech, but here we are." Polite laughter. Someone clapped. Valerie's hands folded in her lap. Lacey launched into thanks. Friends, bridesmaids, the venue, the planner. She even thanked Parker's mother for always bringing the best sangria to our planning nights. Then she glanced at Valerie. "And of course, my mom, who's only here because she paid for the food." A burst of laughter, scattered, awkward. Some gasped, a few sipped faster. Valerie blinked. Just once. She didn't frown, didn't move, didn't react at all, but the blush that climbed her neck was hot and humiliating. Her name, her presence, reduced to a punchline in front of 50 guests she didn't even know half of. Lacey had already moved on. "Okay, who wants cupcakes?" she chirped. Mike handed off like nothing happened. She stepped toward the dessert table, phone already angled for the next selfie. No one noticed Valerie hadn't laughed. She slowly picked up her glass, water, not wine, and took a long, controlled sip. The eucalyptus on the table beside her suddenly smelled too strong. An older woman at her table leaned toward her, offered a half smile. "Kids these days, they don't always think before they speak." Valerie nodded but didn't answer. She wasn't upset at the words. She was gutted by the comfort with which they were delivered. By the time dessert was served, Valerie had excused herself to the restroom. She didn't return. That night, back in her one-story home with the creaky porch swing and 2 stubborn rose bushes that never bloomed when they were supposed to, Valerie set her purse down and walked into the hallway closet. Behind the stack of extra towels and a fireproof box marked "Important," she pulled out a cream-colored envelope. Her original will, drafted 4 years ago, still sealed. She took a red pen from the kitchen drawer, pressed it against the paper, and in bold, slow script wrote across the front, "Pause everything." Then she set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long, long time, not thinking about the food, not about the money, but about the moment her daughter looked into a microphone, then directly past her. That night she pulls out her original will and writes across the envelope, "Pause everything." They ate from my wallet, but wouldn't even make room at the table. The morning after the bridal shower, Valerie woke up earlier than usual, her body betraying the exhaustion she hadn't fully admitted the night before. Her back ached, not from work, not from age, but from the emotional weight she'd carried in silence. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen island, the same spot where she'd once helped Lacey with college applications, science fair posters, and broken hearts. But this morning, the only thing spread across the counter was her laptop. Lacey had already posted photos. The album was titled "Best Shower Ever 53 Photos." Flowers, champagne, cupcakes with gold leaf toppers, Lacey and her bridesmaids laughing mid-toast. One blurry shot of Valerie, seated near the mimosa bar, her expression unreadable. That was it, her single cameo in the entire carousel of curated joy. Valerie stared at the screen, then clicked open the comments. One in particular slowed her breath. It was from Parker, Lacey's fiancé. Her mom's intense, glad she stayed quiet yesterday. Valerie didn't blink. She read it again, slowly this time. As if a second pass might soften it, it didn't. The words weren't cruel. They weren't even loud, but that's what made them cut deeper. They were casual, tossed off like a piece of lint, dismissive, forgettable, and absolutely unforgettable. She closed the browser without commenting. Instead, she opened her phone and scrolled to Jamie's contact, her estate attorney. She tapped out a message, brief and pointed. "Jamie, I'd like to review all estate documents." Quietly. The reply came within the hour. "Absolutely. I can fit you in tomorrow afternoon." Valerie set her phone down and pulled out a notepad, the one she used for grocery lists, gift planning, and budgeting. This time, she titled the page, "Contributions, Past 3 Years." She began writing, line by line. Bridal shower venue, $3,200. Catering deposit, $4,000. Floral pre-order, $1,150. Bridal dress alteration gift, $900. Emergency car repair for Parker, $600. Down payment on apartment, $2,000. And that was just the start. Each amount had a date. Each check had her name in the corner. What none of them had were thank you notes, or acknowledgement, or any sign that the generosity had been treated as anything other than obligation. She flipped to a new page and circled the top in red. Nothing was free. Not even me. The air in the kitchen felt denser now, less like home, more like a staging area. Valerie walked over to her filing cabinet, pulled out the folder labeled Lacey, Wedding, and thumbed through the emails she'd printed over the past year. Catering confirmations, vendor contacts, notes she'd made during the tasting sessions. Then she realized there was something missing. The reception balance. She hadn't seen a final quote. She opened her email and typed a message to the wedding planner, a woman named Cassidy whom she'd met once in passing. Subject: Reception invoice. "Hi Cassidy, could you kindly forward me a copy of the itemized breakdown for the reception charges? I'd like to review what's remaining on the contract. Thanks, Valerie Ames." She reread it once before sending. Calm, professional, no edge. She didn't want to fight, she wanted clarity. The reply came by late afternoon. "Hi Valerie, thanks for reaching out. Please note that, per your daughter's directive, you are listed as the backup financial contact should the primary payment method be declined. Let me know if you'd like to remain listed or if you'd prefer we adjust. Best, Cassidy. Merryweather Events." Valerie didn't move for a full 30 seconds. Her hands remained poised above the keyboard, the cursor blinking like an unanswered question. Backup. Not mother, not guest of honor. Just an emergency wallet in case things went sideways. She exhaled through her nose, slow and sharp. Then she clicked reply, but didn't type anything just yet. Instead, she turned to the calendar pinned on the wall behind her, circled the wedding date in ink, and underneath it, in tiny, deliberate script, she wrote, "Exit plan begins here." The planner responds, "Your daughter listed you as financial backup for the reception venue. When you realize you were funding a fantasy that never included you." The next afternoon, the waiting room at Jamie's law office smelled like citrus oil and clean carpet, a far cry from the antiseptic chaos of the ER where Valerie had spent 30 years of her life stitching people back together. But today, she wasn't here to heal anyone. She was here to unbind. Jamie appeared in the doorway promptly at 2 p.m., a trim woman in a gray wrap dress with a fountain pen tucked into her blazer like a weapon. She smiled with recognition, but didn't offer small talk. Jamie was practical, discreet, and had the kind of presence that made you feel like even your second guessing had a folder with tabs. They walked into the conference room. Valerie set her tote on the table and removed 2 things: her notepad, now filled with itemized expenses, and the wedding planner's email. Jamie read silently. Her brow furrowed once. Then she looked up. Technically, she said, they can't use your name unless you co-signed. Did you sign anything related to the venue? Valerie shook her head. Number. But I've covered so much that Lacey assumed I'd be too embarrassed to say no. Again. Jamie gave a quiet, approving nod. Then it's good you came in. We can file an emergency revocation letter, something that formally severs any implied or verbal financial promises. It's not a lawsuit, it's just clarity in writing. I want clarity. I also want out. They spent the next hour going over documents. Jamie drafted a notarized statement that revoked any informal offers of financial responsibility regarding the wedding. She added language about unauthorized representation and potential legal action if Valerie's name was used again without consent. I'll file this with the vendors and flag your name in our internal alert system, Jamie said. You'll get copies for your records. Want to go further? Valerie didn't hesitate. Yes, I want to lock the doors they keep walking through. By the end of the appointment, her to-do list had grown, but it was empowering. She signed the revocation letter, changed her credit card alerts to notify her of every transaction over $1, sent cancellation requests to 3 store accounts where she'd once let Lacey use her login to grab a few things, removed Parker from the auto debit for her streaming service. Nothing earth-shattering, just steady erasures. At home, she opened her laptop and pulled up the reception venue's contact page. The number rang 3 times before a cheery voice answered. Harbor Heights Events, this is Nina. Valerie cleared her throat and slightly adjusted her tone to sound younger, less traceable. Hi, I'm calling regarding the Ames Ford wedding. I need to update the contact information for the financial file. There's been a change. Oh, okay, Nina said. And you are? Just a party involved in the transaction. My role's been removed. I'd like my name off any backup payment structures. There was a pause. Keys clicked. I see that Valerie Ames is listed under financial backup. You'd like that name removed? Yes, immediately. More typing. Then a polite confirmation. Done. You've been removed from the ledger. Thank you, Valerie said, and hung up. The silence in her kitchen was so complete, it felt ceremonial. She stood in front of the fridge, not to eat, but to breathe. There was a time when she would have been nervous, guilt-ridden, worried about how Lacey would react. But now, all she felt was a slow, spreading calm. Not icy, not cold, just clean. At 8:03 p.m., her phone buzzed. A new message from Lacey. Why are they saying the deposit didn't go through? Valerie stared at the screen for a moment, then placed the phone face down on the counter and walked to the stove, where water was just beginning to boil. She wasn't going to answer yet. Let them feel the silence she'd lived in for too long. Lacey texts, Why are they saying the deposit didn't go through? They said I was dramatic. I hadn't even started yet. Valerie didn't reply to the text. She didn't need to. The silence, for once, was intentional. Not an absence, but a boundary. When the second text came through an hour later, followed by 2 missed calls from Lacey's number, she let the screen dim and stayed curled in her armchair, a soft throw blanket over her knees and her tea still warm in her hands. She had nothing left to explain. That chapter had already been redlined. The next morning, she drove to Jamie's office once more, this time with a request that had been forming since the moment she'd walked out of the bridal shower, with her dignity wilting under blush-colored balloons. Inside the conference room, with its scent of lemonwood polish and old paper, she spoke with quiet finality. I want Lacey removed as sole beneficiary, she said, laying a copy of her will on the table. And I want a new clause added, something airtight. Jamie looked up. A disinheritance clause? Valerie nodded. Wording that makes clear, anyone who publicly humiliates the grantor forfeits all claim. Jamie didn't blink. We'll draft it today. An hour later, the revised trust documents were in process. Lacey's name removed from the top of the distribution tree. No more automatic assumptions. No more future entitlements written in ink because of shared DNA and forgotten gratitude. Instead, Valerie designated the majority of her estate to be divided evenly between Maria, her goddaughter, a teacher in Kansas City, and a small scholarship fund for nursing students who planned to work in trauma units. The rest would be hers until she said otherwise. That night she drove to First Ridge Bank and rented a safe deposit box. The clerk asked if she wanted to assign a second key holder. She declined. "Just me," she said, tapping her ID on the counter. "That's enough." She placed inside the box her updated trust, the revocation letter Jamie had filed, her original will with "pause everything" still marked in red, and a single check dated 6 months prior. One she'd written to Lacey for apartment startup, $2,000 cashed within 48 hours. It wasn't for revenge, it was for record-keeping. When she got home, the house was quiet in the kind of way she used to mistake for loneliness. Now, it just felt honest. Valerie opened the hall closet and pulled out a plastic bin marked "Photos," dragging it to the living room and setting it gently on the carpet. For hours, she scanned them. Snapshots of birthdays, Thanksgivings, graduations, Lacey blowing out candles at 8, Valerie pinning a corsage to her prom dress. So many images where she was the one behind the camera, the invisible architect of joy. She paused at one. Lacey at 10 years old, arms wrapped tightly around her mother's neck, both of them in matching sweatshirts. Valerie held the photo by its edges, the moment frozen before the edits began. On the back, she wrote in soft pen, "Before she forgot me." Then she slipped it into a new folder, labeled simply, "Proof of Presence." As she replaced the lid and slid the bin back into its spot, her cell phone lit up with a number she didn't immediately recognize. She answered, curious more than anything. "Hello? Valerie?" "It's Dana Ford, Parker's mom." Valerie blinked once before recognizing the voice, too polished, too composed, like a woman who had never been told no at a boutique. "I'm just calling to check in," Dana continued. "Lacey's been in tears all day. She says you've been distant and it's affecting the planning. She wouldn't tell me what happened, so I'm asking, what did you say to upset her?" Valerie sat down slowly, the receiver warm in her hand, her thumb resting on the mute button. She didn't answer. Not yet. Because the real question wasn't what she'd said, it was what she'd finally stopped accepting. Parker's mother calls her directly, "What did you say to upset Lacey?" "They assumed I was still funding the cake. I was already carving a new legacy." The next morning, Valerie stood in the kitchen with her landline pressed to her shoulder, the dial tone humming like a warning. She took a slow sip of coffee, steadied her breath, and then pressed redial. Dana picked up on the second ring. "Valerie, hi, thank you for calling me back." Her voice was too bright, the kind of cheerfulness people deploy when they know they're tiptoeing into an emotional minefield. Valerie didn't indulge it. "I'll be at the wedding," she said calmly, "but not as a sponsor." A pause. "I see." Dana recovered quickly. "That's certainly your choice. It's just, this close to the event, Lacey's very emotional. She's under a lot of stress." "I'm not one of the vendors," Valerie replied. "Her stress isn't my invoice." And with that, she ended the call. No anger, no apology, just a new boundary drawn in ink. By noon, she was sitting across from Jamie again, signing formal documentation that made her exit not just symbolic, but legal. Jamie reviewed the paperwork line by line, her tone brisk, supportive. "This revocation letter will go out to all vendors today. From this point forward, your name is no longer to be listed on any wedding-related accounts. If a payment defaults, it won't fall to you." Valerie nodded, signing with the same steady hand she'd once used to write permission slips and mortgage checks. This time, the ink-severed obligations she'd carried long past their usefulness. Jamie slid another document forward. "I've also finalized your estate plan revisions. Would you like to review before we file?" Valerie scanned the breakdown. It was clean, unsentimental. It didn't need poetry, it needed precision. Lacey, removed. 40% to a nursing scholarship fund named after Valerie's late supervisor, Elaine Connors, who once stayed with a trauma patient through a 42-hour shift. 20% to the Haven Paws Animal Shelter, the only place that had never asked her to prove her worth before giving her comfort. 40% to Maria, the goddaughter who called just to say hi and remembered her birthday without prompts. At the bottom of the page, next to the signature line, Jamie had written in neat legal type, "Grantor affirms, This is not about withholding. This is about recentering. Valerie signed, then sat back, the quiet between them satisfying. She didn't need to say it out loud. She wasn't removing her daughter from her legacy out of cruelty. She was finally including herself in it. That evening, she returned home and pulled out her travel planner from the kitchen drawer, the one she hadn't used in years, except to dog-ear articles about places she never quite gave herself permission to visit. Alaska. It had always been Alaska. She opened her laptop, found a solo cruise leaving the day after the wedding and booked it. Window cabin, whale watching included. She added a note under the confirmation email. Subject, do not disturb. Body, I will be unreachable. Intentionally. Next, she sat down with her stationery set and began drafting a letter. Not one she intended to send yet, but one she needed to write. She titled it in the top margin, "If you're reading this, you ignored the toast." She let the first line come unfiltered. This is what it looks like when love becomes a transaction, and the receipt finally gets denied. She folded the letter and placed it in the same fireproof box where her documents now lived. Her voice, archived, protected, indisputable. It was just past dusk when headlights swept across her driveway. She looked up from the sink and froze. A silver sedan. Too familiar. A few seconds later, a knock, firm, rapid, unrelenting, landed on the front door. Valerie walked to the entryway and stood silently behind the wood. She didn't need to open it to know. Lacey's voice broke through, half shouted, half cracking. "Mom, open the door. We need to talk. I don't understand what's happening." Valerie rested one hand against the doorframe. She wasn't sure yet if she would answer, because she knew exactly what was happening, and for the first time in years, she wasn't the one confused. Lacey shows up at her house, angry, tearful, demanding clarity. She said I was ruining her big day. I was correcting my biggest mistake. The knock had already come and gone, but the echo of it lingered in Valerie's hallway like smoke. She waited a few more seconds before turning the deadbolt, slowly. The door creaked open to reveal Lacey, her face blotched red from either crying or sheer anger. It was hard to tell which. Her hair was still in the bridal blowout, but frizz had crept in at the temples. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest like she was holding herself together by force. "I don't understand," Lacey said without a greeting. "What's happening? You're pulling out? You're ignoring my calls? You're blowing everything up." Valerie stepped back, opened the door wide enough to allow her in, then turned toward the kitchen without a word. She didn't need to speak yet. Lacey's panic would fill the room faster than any explanation. "Everyone's asking what's wrong?" Lacey continued, her voice sharp. "The vendors are confused. Parker's pissed, and now Parker's mom thinks you're going senile or something." Valerie turned slowly, tea towel in hand, and folded it over the sink. "I'm not senile," she said. "I'm finally sane." Lacey stared. "What does that even mean?" "It means I'm not here to fund my own erasure." The silence that followed was taut, and then, inevitably, Lacey snapped, "You're embarrassing me." The words came out louder than intended. Valerie flinched slightly, not from fear, but from the tired recognition of a daughter who had never learned that shame could be inherited if you let it sit too long. Valerie straightened her back. "You did that on the mic." Lacey rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, are you seriously still upset about that?" "It was a joke." "You laughed," Valerie said, "but I was the only one paying." She reached for the envelope on the side table, the revised will Jamie had printed for her to keep at home. Valerie held it out, 2 fingers gripping the edge. "Read it. You might finally see the cost." Lacey didn't take it. She snatched it, and in one sharp motion, tore it clean down the middle. It fluttered to the floor like a broken promise, one half landing beneath the side table, the other curling near her feet. Valerie didn't react. Instead, she stepped to the bookshelf, opened a cabinet door, and pulled out a framed document from the top shelf. It was her original will, the one she'd once displayed quietly beside family photos, back when she thought legacy was something you gifted, not protected. She turned the frame around and held it up. "This is what respect used to look like," she said, "before I realized how fragile it was in the wrong hands." Lacey's expression twisted, shock, disbelief, and something close to regret flickering through her eyes. "You don't mean this," she said, quieter now. "I mean all of it," Valerie replied, just as quietly. The framed will remained between them, heavy as glass and twice as sharp. "I'm not trying to hurt you," Valerie added. "I'm just tired of building a future for someone who keeps rewriting my past." The hallway clock ticked 3 times before either of them moved. Finally, Valerie stepped forward, not harsh, not dramatic, and opened the front door. "Lacey," she said softly, "I think it's time you left." For a moment it seemed Lacey might fight back, but the words didn't come. She turned instead, brushing past her mother, the hem of her coat catching on the doormat as she stepped into the fading light. Valerie didn't watch her go. She closed the door slowly, locked it with practiced ease, and leaned her forehead gently against the wood. The house didn't feel quieter. It felt cleared. Later that evening, Valerie sat at her desk, reviewing bank notifications and sipping her tea when a new email pinged. From parker.ford@email.com, subject, "This might tank the wedding." Valerie opened it. "Your daughter's in a spiral. I thought you should know. If something doesn't change soon, she might call the whole thing off." Valerie read it once, twice. Then she closed the tab. Not because she didn't care, but because some spirals are just gravity catching up. Parker sends an email. "Your daughter's in a spiral. This might tank the wedding." She was spiraling because the ATM stopped talking back. The email came in at 10:13 a.m., subject line screaming in all caps, "Are you really doing this?" Valerie opened it, already knowing the tone it would take. It wasn't grief. It wasn't reconciliation. It was negotiation masquerading as sentiment. Inside, Lacey had written what looked like an apology, but it unraveled sentence by sentence into something more familiar. Blame padded in soft language, guilt edged with entitlement. "I don't understand how you could do this right before my big day. After everything we've been through. You're my mother. You're supposed to be there. You'll regret missing this moment. I'll never forgive you if you let some misunderstanding ruin everything we've built." Valerie read it once, slowly. Then again, as if checking her own pulse. Then she clicked mark as unread, closed the laptop, and let the silence settle like a heavy curtain over a stage that no longer needed her performance. That night, she made dinner. Not out of routine, but out of intention. Roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, a simple arugula salad with lemon vinaigrette. She laid 3 plates. One for herself, one for Maria, her goddaughter, who'd driven in from Kansas City on short notice, and one for Lorraine, her closest friend, who'd brought a bottle of red and a box of candied ginger for no reason at all. They didn't ask about Lacey. They didn't mention the email. Instead, they toasted with wine, arms half raised, eyes crinkled at the corners. "To attending my own life again," Valerie said. "To RSVPing yes to yourself," Maria added. "To whatever happens next," Lorraine said, raising her glass just slightly higher. They clinked, and the sound was light, not celebratory, but unburdened. Later, after dishes had been rinsed and the kitchen lights dimmed, Valerie opened her old travel binder and flipped through the tabs. A yellow, sticky note still marked a page titled "Pacific Northwest Coastline, Solo Options." She peeled it off and stuck it to a fresh page. Her birthday was in 2 months. She didn't want fanfare, just mountains, maybe a little fog, and the feeling of movement. She'd already spent decades giving her milestones away. This one would be hers. She typed a short email to her travel agent and titled it, "Birthday Retreat. Quiet Please." She didn't check her phone. She didn't need to. Whatever messages waited there could keep waiting. The next morning, her inbox held only one new email, from Jamie. Subject, "Trust. Finalized filing confirmation." The message was brief. "Valerie, the new trust is now officially filed and indexed. You're fully protected. No further edits needed unless you choose. Congratulations." She read it 3 times, not because she doubted it, but because the idea of being fully protected felt like armor she hadn't realized she'd been walking without. Valerie took a deep breath, closed the laptop, and placed her hand over the lid as if sealing something sacred. Later that evening, just as she was lighting a small candle on the windowsill, her phone buzzed with a message from a family friend she hadn't heard from in months. Text from Cheryl T. Hey Val, just saw the final wedding program. Your name's not listed anywhere, not even as mother of the bride. I thought maybe you knew. Let me know if you're okay. Valerie stared at the screen. She didn't reply right away. She just sat in the quiet, holding the phone loosely in one hand, and whispered to no one in particular, "So they've made it official." Outside, the wind stirred the hedges. In her chest, something untied. A family friend texts her, "Your name was just removed from the wedding program. They erased me in print. I'd already erased them in ink." Valerie found the wedding program online later that evening. A PDF attached to a group email she hadn't even been directly included on, forwarded to her by Cheryl with the subject line, "Thought you'd want to see this." The file opened to elegant calligraphy and blush-toned floral borders. A watercolor sketch of the venue graced the cover. Inside, there were bios for each bridesmaid, a warm welcome from the groom's family, and a section titled Gratitude. Valerie skimmed, already knowing. Her name wasn't there, not as mother of the bride, not as Valerie Ames, not anywhere. The spot that traditionally read Parents of the Bride had been replaced with a vague line, "With love and support from our many mentors and friends." She set the laptop down with slow precision, then stood up, walked to her printer, and hit print. 4 pages, clean, crisp, deliberate. When they were done, she sat back at the kitchen table and stared at them. Then she picked up a black gel pen and wrote in the white margin of the last page, "Removed myself first." Her handwriting was neat, measured. She folded the program in thirds and slipped it into her document folder, the one she'd started filling with records, notes, and receipts of every contribution and betrayal too subtle for a courtroom, but too sharp to forget. Then she reached for her phone. The florist's contact was still saved. Eden Blooms, Cassie, owner. She tapped call. Cassie answered on the second ring. "Hi, this is Cassie." "Hi, Cassie," Valerie said evenly. "This is Valerie Ames. I'd like to cancel my portion of the order for the Ford Ames wedding." There was a pause. "Oh, okay. Let me just pull up the file. You were listed for the aisle arrangements and the head table garland, correct?" "That's right. You can release them. I've settled my part directly. Do you still want the thank you card noted?" "No need," Valerie said. The message was received. She ended the call gently, then opened her email and drafted a short message to the planner. Subject: Reception Adjustment Cassidy. You may release my reserved seat at the reception. You'll have one less mouth to feed. Best, Valerie Ames. No bitterness, just subtraction. Later that afternoon, Maria stopped by. She didn't knock. She never needed to. She walked in with a canvas tote and a smile that didn't pry. "I know you're leaving soon," she said, placing a wrapped gift on the kitchen counter. "Early birthday/early freedom present." Valerie opened the wrapping slowly. Inside was a leather-bound travel journal, soft navy cover, gold-pressed initials, VA. Maria had added 2 lines in the first page, in looping ink, "For the next version of you, and all the places that never asked you to shrink." Valerie closed the journal gently, fingers tracing the edge. "I'll pack it first," she said. And she did. By nightfall, her suitcase sat open on the guest bed. Neat stacks of clothes, comfortable shoes, her camera, the itinerary clipped to the inside pocket, along with a small envelope labeled "Unreachable." She added a small tin of Earl Grey tea and the photo Maria had taken of her under the magnolia tree. That night, she lit a candle and sat on the porch, watching the quiet dark stretch over the street. It wasn't grief she felt. It was confirmation. Then her phone buzzed. An Instagram screenshot forwarded by Lorraine. Lacey had posted a new photo, her in a white silk robe, glass of champagne in hand, bridal makeup half done, smiling just past the camera. The caption read, "Some people can't handle not being center stage." Valerie stared at the words, her thumb hovering over the screen. Then she turned the phone over, screen down on the armrest. Let them perform. She was already off the stage. Lacey posts a cryptic Instagram caption. Some people can't handle not being center stage. She tried to make me look petty. I'd already published peace. The morning after the post, Valerie sat at her kitchen table, the candle from the night before now a wax ring on a saucer. Outside, the world spun forward. Wedding week was in full swing. Lacey's Instagram was flooded with countdown graphics, hair trial selfies, and reposts of thinly veiled shade. Valerie didn't check it again. She had other things to write. She opened her laptop and clicked into the empty blog template she'd bookmarked months ago and never touched. She'd titled the project The Funded Ghost, half in jest, half in truth. A placeholder at the bottom of a life she once footed the bill for, yet had slowly vanished from. She began typing. Not a memoir, not a rant. Just clarity. Post 1. How to reclaim dignity after public disrespect. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. The story was structural, not personal. It had played out in hundreds of houses, at rehearsal dinners and showers, on cake invoices and seating charts. Her words were plain. This is what happens when you fund the feast and get uninvited to dessert, when your name is on the check but not in the thank you speech. This is not revenge, it's realignment. She attached screenshots, dates and amounts from a few of the wedding expenses, all redacted, no one's name, just dollar signs and silence. She let the numbers speak. By evening, the post had quietly gone viral, not in the influencer way, but in the forwarded by text message way. By bedtime, the views had passed 18,000. The comments trickled in, mostly anonymous, all familiar. This, all of this. I paid for the dress and was told not to wear white to the reception. I was the mother of the bride. My daughter sent me her registry link but not an invite. Thank you. I thought it was just me. That last one made her stop. She read it again, then slowly replied, It never was. They just made us too quiet to hear each other. The next day, she added a second page to the blog. Resources. A list of elder law attorneys in 5 states. A breakdown of how to create an emergency trust amendment, links to grant programs for single mothers, estranged parents, and those financially drained by wedding costs they never consented to. Then she donated $1,000, half anonymously, half symbolically, to a nonprofit she'd found called Legacy Without Apology, which provided legal and emotional aid to parents erased from family ceremonies. She made the donation in honor of a name she no longer needed to write in her will. In the following days, her inbox began to fill, not just with stories, but with gratitude. Women in their 50s and 60s, some who had walked their daughters down the aisle and never received a photo, others who had footed the bill and been told they were too extra for the welcome dinner, a few who had spent their retirement savings trying to secure a seat at a table where they were never fed. One woman wrote, I brought the napkins, set the tables, paid the DJ, and was seated in the back behind a fern. You made me feel less invisible. Valerie read each message slowly, sometimes twice. She responded to many, not all. Some didn't need replies, they needed space. That evening, she sat on her porch with her laptop balanced on her knees and a blanket over her shoulders. Maria had sent over a new playlist titled For the Quiet Exit. It played softly through her phone speaker as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops. She didn't smile often reading these things, but when she did, it wasn't out of triumph. It was out of recognition. A nod to the versions of herself who had once stayed silent and were now finally hearing their own echo. She was about to close her laptop when a new message came in. Subject, Podcast Opportunity, Let's Talk. The sender was a name she didn't know, but the signature read, Emma Clark, host of Where the Mothers Went. The message was short. Valerie, I read your blog. Every word landed. Would you be willing to share this story on record? We think the world needs to hear your voice. Valerie stared at the blinking cursor in the reply window. Then she clicked Save Draft and sat back, not unsure, just ready to decide on her own terms. A podcast host emails her, Would you be willing to talk on record? That line used to sting. Now it's the name of my segment. The podcast recording took place over Zoom, just after sunset. Valerie closed the blinds, lit her rosemary candle, and made sure the mug in front of her wasn't too full, just warm enough to hold, steady enough to anchor. Emma Clark's voice came through her headphones with ease and confidence. "No rush," she said. "We'll just talk." The segment had a working title, but when Emma asked Valerie how she wanted it labeled, she didn't hesitate. "Call it, 'She Paid for the Food.' That's what everyone remembers anyway." Emma paused, then laughed lightly. "Now that," she said, "is a headline." The interview began softly. Emma asked about Valerie's career as a nurse, her decades in trauma wards, how that shaped her instincts. Valerie answered with poise. She didn't waver, didn't ramble. Just facts. Emotion folded neatly between them like linen on a dinner table. Then came the pivot. "Tell me about the wedding," Emma said gently. The moment when things shifted. Valerie took a breath. She described the bridal shower. The moment with the mic. The line that sounded like a joke but landed like a scalpel. She described the quiet afterward. The slow ache of invisibility disguised as family planning. But she never said Lacey's name. She never needed to. "I funded the celebration," Valerie said, voice even. "I wasn't celebrating. That difference matters." Emma let the silence stretch. "What would you say to your daughter if she were listening right now?" Valerie tilted her head toward the mic, gaze soft but steady. "I wouldn't say anything," she replied. She had the mic. She used it. I just listened. And then I decided not to fund the encore. That was the line that caught fire. The episode aired 3 days later. Within 12 hours, it had climbed to the top 10 in its category. Within 24, the hashtag number "She Paid for the Food" was trending, not in outrage, but in recognition. Women stitched clips, shared stories, commented with stories so eerily alike it was as if they were reading from the same discarded script. Valerie didn't go viral because she raged. She went viral because she didn't. Her restraint was the exhale people didn't know they'd been holding. The comments under the podcast were a chorus. "I felt every word. My mother went through this. I wish she could have heard it. I'm saving this episode for the day I need to choose myself. She's not just a guest on this show. She's the ghost they all try to forget." Quietly, something else began to shift. Lacey's name, once bathed in bridal glow, began to disappear from guest photos. A few of her closest friends unfollowed her. Others removed tagged images from their own accounts. No drama, just distance. Like something unseen had broken, a string pulled too taut for too long. Valerie didn't gloat. She didn't even check. Maria did. She came over that evening with takeout and a bottle of wine. The sunset was a warm wash through the kitchen window as they plated dumplings and peeled open fortune cookies that neither of them believed in, but still enjoyed reading. Maria opened her laptop, tilted the screen. "Have you seen your blog today?" Valerie raised an eyebrow. "Should I?" Maria turned the laptop toward her. A new blog entry was at the top, one she hadn't published yet, one she'd apparently scheduled after a night of bourbon and clarity. The title read, "And Then I Booked the Cruise." Valerie stared at it. A smile crept, slow and dry, across her face. She didn't need to reread it. She remembered every word. She had written it days ago, just after finalizing the details of her Alaska trip. But seeing it now, on the page, on the screen, in her own voice, felt like standing in a room where the mic was finally hers. Maria reads the newest blog entry, "And then I booked the cruise." They had a wedding. I had an awakening. The cruise ship departed just after noon on a clear, steady tide. The sky was postcard blue, the kind of color people chase in retirement brochures, and the dock slipped away like a memory Valerie no longer needed to rehearse. She stood on the observation deck, a silver shawl tucked around her shoulders, her dress catching sunlight in a way that made her look quietly unbothered. Not overdressed, not invisible, just centered. At peace in the kind of clothing you choose for yourself, not for someone else's seating chart. Today, Lacey was getting married. Today, Valerie boarded a ship and left her phone off. She carried only 2 things, a book of poetry tucked under her arm and a leather-bound travel journal that now lived in the zippered pocket of her tote. Both weighed less than any grudge she'd ever carried. At sea, she found a quiet lounge on the upper deck. Not the bar with the live band, not the sun-warmed pool chairs, just a quiet, leather armchair near a window that framed the water like a moving painting. She flipped open her journal and began to write. Today my daughter married someone else, and I remarried my boundaries. She let the sentence settle into the page, then added a second line. No ring, no witnesses, just clarity. Valerie didn't cry. She didn't even sigh. She simply closed the journal and looked out the window, letting the waves remind her how much strength there is in constant motion. Later that evening, she recorded a short video on her laptop. Just 3 minutes. No makeup, no filter, just her voice, slow and certain. Thank you to everyone who reminded me I wasn't alone. I didn't miss the wedding. I chose a different vow. She saved the video, titled it Reclaimed, and uploaded it to her private blog. No fanfare, no announcement. As she walked back to her cabin, a steward approached her in the hallway. Ms. Ames? She stopped, curious. This was left at the front desk for you, he said, handing her a white envelope with her name written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. She took it, thanked him, and waited until she was back in her room to open it. Inside was a single page. It read, I recognized you from the podcast. You said everything I couldn't say at my own daughter's wedding. If you're open to it, I'd love to buy you a drink and say thank you in person. Claire, Cabin 714. Valerie folded the note slowly, her fingers moving with the kind of care reserved for something delicate. She didn't rush to respond. She didn't feel urgency. Just something warm, like possibility. She changed into something soft, linen pants, a loose cardigan, and made her way to the upper lounge. Claire was already there, seated near the railing, a sprig of mint floating in her cocktail. She stood when she saw Valerie, not with awe but with quiet recognition. May I? Valerie asked, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. Please, Claire said. I didn't want to intrude, I just wanted to say thank you. They talked for hours. About adult daughters, about unspoken sacrifices, about how strange it is to give your whole life to people who still ask you to stand behind the curtain. Claire had paid for her daughter's honeymoon, hadn't been offered a seat at the rehearsal dinner. You helped me feel less crazy, Claire said softly. Like I wasn't the only one grieving something that hadn't technically ended. Valerie nodded, sipped her drink, and replied, Grief's not about endings. It's about exits you didn't choose. They clinked glasses once. No toast. Just resonance. The next morning, a small note was slipped under Valerie's door. This time on official ship stationery. You are cordially invited to participate in this evening's guest panel, Empowered Women at Sea, Stories of Strength, hosted by the captain, 7 p.m. in the Horizon Lounge. Valerie read it twice, then slowly smiled. Not because she was flattered, but because someone had finally asked her to speak on her own terms. The ship captain invites Valerie to speak on a women's empowerment panel. They cast me off. I learned to float. The Horizon Lounge was softly lit, the ceiling low and curved like the inside of a conch shell, designed for intimacy, not spectacle. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing a modest platform. No stage lights, no mics booming through overhead speakers. Just the quiet anticipation of 50 strangers gathered to listen. Valerie stood at the edge of the platform, her hands lightly clasped in front of her, a printed copy of her first blog post folded in her purse beside her seat. She'd been introduced simply, Valerie Ames, a retired nurse and writer of the blog The Funded Ghost. The topic of the panel was Surviving Disrespect Without Losing Your Dignity. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't use the notes she'd brought. She didn't need them. I wasn't erased all at once, she began. It happened in increments. A forgotten thank you, a joke at my expense, a chair that never got reserved. It took years for me to realize I'd become a wallet with a pulse. The room was so quiet, she could hear the small shifts of breath, the occasional rustle of paper. Valerie continued, not loud, not performative, just grounded. I paid for the catering, she said, but I paid more for the silence I sat in after. Heads nodded. One woman dabbed her eyes. But I didn't come here to rehash the pain. I came because someone gave me a mic I didn't have to fight for. And I want to say, Your voice doesn't expire after someone stops listening, it expands. You just have to be brave enough to hear it yourself. When the panel ended, there was no thunderous applause, just something softer, more human. Women stood in small circles, passing tissues and clasping hands. One by one they approached Valerie, not with questions, but with resonance. "Thank you for saying it out loud," one whispered. Another pressed a printed version of the blog into her hand. "Would you sign this? For my sister. She paid for the wedding and was seated behind the photographer's tripod." Valerie signed with care. Just her name and 3 words beneath it. "You're not alone." She was gathering her things when she heard the faintest sound, glass clinking together, champagne being poured. She turned to see a steward stepping onto the platform with a tray of flutes. The cruise director took the mic. "We have a surprise for someone tonight," she said, "for reminding us that boundaries are not walls, they're lifelines, and for proving that dignity isn't something granted, it's something reclaimed." She raised her glass. To Valerie. Around the lounge, every woman raised theirs too. "To Valerie," they echoed. Then, from somewhere near the back, a voice rang out, clear, firm, a little shaky. "She paid for the food?" A pause, and then all of them together, the phrase echoing louder than any DJ, louder than any wedding toast, "and fed us all." Valerie laughed. Then, unexpectedly, she cried. Not a quiet tear, not a restrained shimmer. She wept. Open and real. The kind of tears that aren't made of sorrow, but release. Her hand trembled slightly as she raised her glass in return, eyes glassy, heart full. That night, she walked the deck in her slippers, the sea dark and endless around her. She felt taller somehow. Not lighter, but right-sized finally. Back in her cabin, she opened her laptop to upload a photo from the event. There, sitting unread, was a new message, Instagram DM, from @Laceyford_wedding. The preview line read, "I heard about the blog, you embarrassed me." Valerie didn't open it. She stared at the screen for a long time, then she closed the lid. Not out of avoidance, but because she already knew the ending. Lacey DMs her, "I heard about the blog, you embarrassed me." She called it betrayal, I called it balance. Valerie opened the DM the next morning, not because she was unsure, but because closure often arrives disguised as confrontation. The message from Lacey was short, but dense with heat. "I heard about the blog. You embarrassed me. People are sending me clips. I can't believe you'd make a spectacle out of our family like that. You've ruined what should have been the happiest week of my life." Valerie read it 3 times, calmly. The ship rocked gently beneath her bare feet, a rhythm steadier than her daughter's indignation. She sipped her tea, no sugar, just lemon, and considered the distance between hurt feelings and actual harm. Then she typed her reply. 1 sentence. "The mic was yours. Now the message is mine." She hit send, blocked the account, closed the app, and that was it. The line was drawn, not in fury, but in permanence. She spent the afternoon at sea drafting something new, not a blog post, not a journal entry, something that had been stirring quietly beneath every word she'd typed in the last month, a book proposal. She opened a fresh document and titled it in bold at the top, "Your Mic, My Will, How to Reclaim Your Voice," after being written out. It wasn't a memoir. It was a manifesto, a guide for women like her, financially generous, emotionally dismissed, socially erased. She outlined the chapters like surgical steps. Chapter 1, When Gratitude Becomes Performance. Chapter 4, The Cost of Being Called Too Much. Chapter 7, Contracts Are Not Love Letters. Chapter 10, Writing Yourself Back in the Words Came Quickly. Not bitter, not rushed, just right. That evening, she emailed a former patient's daughter, now a junior acquisitions editor in Chicago. They hadn't spoken in years, but she remembered Valerie's kindness after a long recovery. The subject line of the email was simple, query, a voice no longer borrowed. The next morning, the reply came back. "Valerie, I read the proposal, twice. We need to talk. I'm forwarding this to senior editorial. When's your birthday? Let's book the call then. Feels fitting." Valerie stared at the message, then opened her calendar and circled the date, quietly, deliberately, not for anyone else, not for a party, just for herself. She stood, stretched her legs, and walked out onto the cabin balcony, letting the wind brush her cheeks as the sea carried her farther from the version of herself that used to ask for space. Back home a week later, she met Jamie for coffee in a sunlit corner of a local bookstore. Valerie handed her a slim folder. Jamie raised an eyebrow. "Another update?" "Last one," Valerie said. "I want a clause added to the trust." "Go on." "Lacey's name stays off, permanently, unless she completes verified therapy for emotional boundary restoration. Court acknowledged. Not her word." "Legal proof," Jamie tapped her pen. "That'll raise some eyebrows." Valerie smiled. So did being called a wallet in heels. They shared a look. "Got it," Jamie said. "I'll make it ironclad." That afternoon, the trust was updated again. This time not as retaliation, but as reinforcement. Not to punish, to protect. When Valerie got home, she sat on the porch with her laptop open, fingers poised above the keys. She didn't write another post that day. She didn't need to. Her story was moving into a different format now, one where the chapters had page numbers. She was pouring another cup of tea when her phone rang. Jamie's name lit up the screen. "Valerie," she said, breathless with excitement, "I just thought you'd want to know. Your trust clause, the one about humiliation nullifying inheritance, it's been picked up in a new legal guide. It's being cited under elder dignity law reform." Valerie set her cup down, took a slow breath. Not pride, not even satisfaction, just a deep, full acknowledgement that the boundary she'd drawn wasn't just a line, it was a landmark. Jamie calls, "Your trust documents have been cited in a new elder protection guide. I was a guest at her party. I rewrote the invite list for my life." The table was set with quiet elegance, linen napkins, flickering votives, and a vase of seasonal wildflowers that Maria had picked from her own backyard. No caterers, no printed menus, just roasted chicken, herb potatoes, grilled peaches with honey, and the kind of ease that comes only when no one expects you to perform. Valerie poured wine into 3 mismatched glasses and placed one at each setting. The porch lights hummed above them, soft and warm. She wore navy linen pants and a white blouse she'd ironed herself, not for show, but for ritual. Lorraine was already fussing with the salad tongs, pretending she didn't know where they were, just to stall until everyone arrived. Jamie arrived last, holding a small white box tied with a navy ribbon. "For the table," she said, "or the bookshelf." Inside was a framed quote, embossed on thick cardstock trimmed with copper foil. She paid for the food, and then built a feast for herself. Valerie blinked once, then laughed. Not the polite kind, the kind that reached into her chest and pulled something loose. They hung it on the wall above the bookcase, between a photo of Valerie in her nurse's scrubs and one of her and Maria planting herbs on the back deck the summer after Lacey left for college. When the food had been passed and plates half cleared, Valerie stood. "I'm not good at speeches anymore," she said, "but I'm getting better at gratitude with names attached." She reached beneath her chair and pulled out 3 hardbound books, midnight blue, cloth-covered, simple. One for each of them. The title etched in quiet gold at the bottom corner, "The Funded Ghost, Essays and Other Recoveries." Each copy had been personalized. Maria's held a handwritten note tucked in the front flap, "Thank you for seeing me before I saw myself." Lorraine's said, "For every phone call where you didn't ask me to explain." Jamie's, "Because your pen drew better boundaries than mine ever did." They didn't say much in return. They didn't need to. They clinked glasses with murmured toasts. "To presents," Lorraine said. "Not presents," Maria added. Jamie smiled. "To no longer explaining your RSVP." The dinner stretched lazily into twilight, the kind of meal that isn't rushed because no one's waiting for a photo opportunity. Just real time. Just chosen people. Later they sat on the porch, bellies full, wine mellow. Valerie stepped inside to check the mail she'd ignored earlier in the day and found a padded envelope with a return address she recognized. The publishing house. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a stamped contract. It was official. Her book was happening. No edits required. No rewrites. The acquisitions editor had written in the margin of her proposal, "This is not just a story. It's a reckoning." She didn't whoop. She didn't cry. She walked back to the porch, folded the paper neatly, and tucked it into the pocket of her cardigan. When they asked what it was, she said only, "Just another thing I thought I'd never see in writing." They smiled. They understood. After the guests had gone, Valerie turned off the lights one by one and lingered at the doorway before locking it. She thought about the parties she had once hosted, the roles she had played, the way she used to measure her value by how many people needed her, and how silently she did it. Now her value lived elsewhere, on the bookshelf, in a legal clause, in the steadiness of her own voice. That night, as she powered down her laptop, one final notification blinked on the screen. Subject, submission, confirmation. From the National Women's Digital Archive. Message, Dear Ms. Ames, we're honored to include The Funded Ghost in our permanent collection. Your voice will now be searchable by those who need it most. Welcome to history. Valerie stared at the message. Then she whispered, more to herself than the screen, "They finally archived what they tried to erase." Valerie's blog is archived in a National Women's Digital Library. She made me a line in her joke. I made her a clause in my estate. The house was quiet again, not the heavy quiet of avoidance, but the intentional stillness of a place that had finally stopped echoing with other people's expectations. The morning light cut across the hallway in soft lines. Valerie padded barefoot to the den where her laptop waited, closed, patient. She opened it slowly. Not out of dread, out of ceremony. She navigated to the old video file saved weeks ago under a name she hadn't dared touch since. Shower, top, toast, final.mp4. It was the clip Cheryl had recorded on her phone, sent quietly through email like contraband. Valerie hadn't watched it since the week of the shower, until now. She clicked play. There it was again. The garland-draped event hall, Lacey in her white lace dress, bouncing on her heels, mic in hand. "Oh gosh, okay," the screen Lacey said, faux surprised. "I wasn't planning to do a speech, but here we are." Valerie smiled, not because it was funny, but because the woman watching now wasn't the one sitting quietly near the mimosa bar, aching with shame and second-guessing. She was someone new, someone harder to displace. Then came the line. "And of course, my mom, who's only here because she paid for the food." The guests laughed, uncomfortable and unsure. On screen, Valerie blinked once and sipped her water. In real life, Valerie pressed pause. She studied her own frozen face. The composure, the posture, the distance. This time, she didn't feel heat rise in her chest. She didn't feel small. She felt clear. That night, she opened her safe deposit box and took out the sealed envelope marked Last Will and Testament, revised. She added a new clause. Maria Ames, full trustee and executor, literary rights holder, archivist of all future reprints and speaking engagements. Lacey Ames, permanently removed, no reinstatement without full reconciliation on terms defined solely by the trustee. She signed it in ink the color of plum, folded the page carefully, then added one line to the signature page, just beneath the witness line. "This is not a revenge story. This is what respect looks like with receipts." 2 weeks later, the publishing house confirmed a release date, spring, just after tax season. "The timing's poetic," the editor had said. "People start re-evaluating their lives, and now they'll have your book to anchor them." Valerie said, "Thank you," then promptly went outside and trimmed back the rose bushes by the porch. Some rituals still had their place. That night, she poured a small glass of whiskey, sat at her writing desk, and pulled out her journal one final time. The candle beside her burned low. On the last page, she wrote in calm script, "I wasn't uninvited. I RSVP'd to myself." She tore the page out gently and folded it in half. Then she opened the side drawer of her desk and pulled out the only thing she'd kept from the original wedding suite, a printed invitation on thick pearl stock. Lacey and Parker's names looped in embossed script. The time, the place, the dress code. She slid the journal page into the envelope and sealed it. There was no return address, no stamp, just memory, marked and filed. She placed it at the back of her bookshelf behind a row of titles she loved, books about women who'd reclaimed the ground beneath their feet without needing to prove anything. Then she turned off the lights, walked to the hallway mirror, studied her reflection. She didn't look softer. She looked centered. Before bed, she picked up her pen one last time and wrote a postscript at the bottom of her original journal entry. A line she hadn't known she'd been writing toward the entire time. She had the mic. I had the contract. She had the mic. I had the contract.